Let me ask you something. Have you ever left a meeting or a conversation or even just a quick text exchange and thought, why did that feel awful? Nothing big happened. No one yelled. No one said anything overtly cruel, but somehow you walked away a little smaller. That's what I want to talk about today. These moments, these subtle, quiet, often unspoken emotional bruises, we don't give them much credit, but they add up. And over time, they start chipping away at something sacred, our confidence. Not the flashy, performative kind, talking about real confidence, the grounded sense that you are worthy, capable, and resilient. What we're dealing with are micro traumas, those tiny emotional injuries we often overlook, dismiss, or rationalize. And when we don't name them, when we don't honor their impact, they start driving the bus quietly from the back seat. Let's walk through 5 ways microtraumas show up and how they silently sabotage confidence, even in the strongest among us. First, microtraumas distort your inner narrative. Every time someone interrupts you in a meeting, rolls their eyes when you speak, or responds with silence when you're vulnerable, it might seem small, but over time, your brain starts rewriting the story. Maybe I'm not worth listening to. And let me be clear, one moment like that doesn't define you. But when these moments pile up, especially when they're unacknowledged or brushed off, they start doing something sneaky. They mess with your internal storytelling. And our brains, they love stories. They're constantly trying to make sense of the world, of ourselves, of where we belong. But here's the catch. When we're repeatedly exposed to subtle invalidations, the stories we tell ourselves start shifting. We stop asking what happened and start wondering, what's wrong with me? That's the quiet danger. Because microtraumas are rarely loud enough to set off alarm bells. They fly under the radar, and yet they have enough weight to begin tilting your entire self-perception. There's this term in psychology called cognitive dissonance. It's the discomfort we feel when our beliefs don't line up with our experiences. So imagine you walk into a room confident in your idea and someone scoffs or talks over you or just flat out ignores you. Your belief says, I have something valuable to contribute, but your experience says, apparently I don't. And if that pattern happens again and again, guess which one your brain starts to believe? It's the repeated experience that starts whispering things like, maybe I shouldn't speak up. Maybe I'm too much. Maybe I'm not enough. And the irony is, these aren't your thoughts, not originally. They're echoes of small moments that got under your skin, subtle cues that your voice didn't matter. But when we internalize those echoes without examining them, they become a part of how we see ourselves. Now, this isn't about blaming the world for every awkward interaction or uncomfortable exchange. We all miss the mark sometimes. We all cause microtraumas, unintentionally or otherwise. But when we don't recognize the cumulative effect of these moments on our own confidence, we start walking through life with a distorted lens. And it's subtle. You don't wake up one morning and say, I'm not confident anymore. You just start hesitating, apologizing for things you didn't do, sitting in the back of the room instead of claiming your seat at the table. You start shrinking just a little because your inner narrative got hijacked by 100 tiny moments no one else even noticed. That's why awareness matters, because when we bring those distortions into the light, we get the chance to rewrite the story, not with perfection, but with honesty. And confidence doesn't grow in pretending nothing hurt. It grows in telling ourselves the truth and daring to believe something better. Second, they build shame, not resilience. We've been taught that if something doesn't knock us down completely, we should just brush it off. But here's the thing. When we ignore microtraumas, we're not building resilience. We're building walls. Shame thrives in silence. And confidence, it can't live in a house run by shame. Let me slow that down because it's important. We tend to confuse emotional suppression with emotional strength. Someone ignores us, underestimates us, makes a passive-aggressive comment, something small, something not worth making a big deal about. And we think the strong thing to do is pretend it didn't matter. We tell ourselves, I'm fine, it's not a big deal, and we carry on. But inside, that moment gets stored. It doesn't just disappear. It finds a quiet corner in our memory and starts whispering things like, don't be too sensitive. Don't make this awkward. Just keep your head down. And while we're busy pretending to be unfazed on the outside, on the inside, shame is laying brick after brick, constructing a wall that separates us from our confidence, our voice, and sometimes even our own sense of self-worth. Now, here's what's tricky. Shame doesn't usually show up and announce itself like, hi, I'm shame. No, it's subtle. It shows up as perfectionism, as people-pleasing, as silence when we should be speaking. It shows up when you don't apply for the job or pitch the idea or have the hard conversation, because some quiet part of you has absorbed the belief that you're not enough or too much or somehow both at the same time. Resilience, the real kind, isn't about toughening up or pushing through without feeling. It's about recognizing what hurt, acknowledging it, and then moving forward with that truth in hand. You don't become resilient by ignoring pain. You become resilient by giving yourself permission to feel it and still choose courage. There's this line I use with myself a lot. You can't outrun shame, but you can outwalk it with honesty. And I mean that. When we call these micro traumas what they are, when we say that moment stung or that tone made me question my value, we give ourselves the chance to respond with compassion instead of criticism, because silence gives shame power. But voice is the antidote. And every time you tell the truth about how something landed, you're dismantling the belief that strength means pretending you're okay. Confidence doesn't grow in denial. It grows in the small, quiet moments where you give yourself permission to be human and still show up anyway. Third, they create what I call invisible armor. After enough micro wounds, we start to armor up, not with strength, but with avoidance. We play small in rooms where we should be standing tall. We hesitate to speak, to lead, to raise our hands, not because we lack capability, but because our nervous system has started to associate vulnerability with danger. And that right there is where the real cost begins. When you've been hurt in subtle ways, when you've shared an idea that was brushed off, opened up and were met with silence, or made a mistake that was met with eye rolls instead of empathy. Your body remembers, maybe not in a dramatic, traumatic way, but in these micro adjustments. You start reading the room for safety instead of opportunity. You start leading with courage and start leading with calculation. It's not, what's the best thing I can contribute here? It becomes, what's the safest thing I can say without risking too much? That's what a visible armor looks like. It's a protective strategy, a survival pattern. And honestly, it's one a lot of high-functioning, smart, successful people are walking around with. We've learned to hide behind competence instead of confidence. We show up looking polished, but we're bracing ourselves on the inside. Because somewhere along the line, we got the message that being fully seen wasn't safe. Now, armor can be clever. It doesn't always look like withdrawal or hiding. Sometimes it shows up as over-preparing, over-apologizing, over-performing, trying to earn belonging instead of knowing you already deserve it. The problem is, the longer we keep that armor on, the more disconnected we become from others and from ourselves. What's worse is that the armor isn't just blocking out the hard stuff, it's also blocking out the good, the joy, the creativity, the connection. You can't selectively numb emotion. If you armor up to avoid embarrassment or rejection, You're also numbing the possibility of genuine confidence, of deep connection, of real trust in yourself and others. I've spent a lot of time in rooms full of leaders, big titles, corner offices, the whole thing. And I can tell you, some of the most armored people in the room are also the most uncertain on the inside. Because confidence doesn't come from perfection. It comes from being willing to be seen without the armor, without the script, without the backup plan. So what do? We start by noticing where the armor is, not to shame ourselves, but to understand the why behind it. And then slowly, gently, we practice putting it down. Not all at once. This isn't about throwing yourself into the fire. It's about choosing moment by moment to risk being seen when it matters most. Because that's where real confidence lives, not in the shield, but in the choice to show up anyway. Fourth, micro-traumas activate your inner critic. The real damage of these experiences isn't always the external moment. It's the internal replay, the story you tell yourself after the moment has passed. I should have spoken up. I always mess things up. They probably think I'm a fraud. This is where micro-traumas do some of their most persistent and invisible work. Because while the moment itself may have passed, your nervous system, your emotions, your thoughts, they're still chewing on it. And what starts as a moment of discomfort or shame quickly becomes a mental loop, not just a replay of what happened, but a retelling through the lens of self-judgment. We all have an inner critic, that voice that shows up uninvited, usually when we're already tired or uncertain, and starts chipping away at our self-trust. But here's the thing, most of us didn't create that voice. It was shaped by culture, by family messages, by the systems we live in, and yes, shaped by micro-traumas, especially the kind that go unnamed and unprocessed. And you get cut off while speaking, and your brain doesn't just register rudeness. It creates a meaning. They cut me off because I'm not smart enough, I wasn't clear, I shouldn't have said anything. The experience isn't the wound, the meaning is. And when these meanings start stacking up, they turn into identity. I'm not good at speaking. I always get it wrong. I'm not leadership material. And once that narrative takes hold, your inner critic doesn't need much to keep it going. A single awkward email exchange, a blank stare in a meeting. Suddenly it's, see, I knew it. I never say the right thing. What's wild and heartbreaking is that the people around us usually have no idea we're fighting this internal battle. Because on the outside, we're doing all the things, smiling, nodding, showing up, but inside we're second guessing, overanalyzing, bracing. I've had to learn that silence and withdrawal aren't always about disinterest or disengagement. Sometimes they're about the volume of the critic inside. And if we don't interrupt that voice, if we don't learn to name it, challenge it, and sometimes just say, hey, I hear you, but not today, it starts to run the show. Confidence doesn't grow in the absence of mistakes. It grows in how we respond to them. It's built when we replace the critic with curiosity. Instead of what's wrong with me, we ask, what's the story I'm telling myself right now, and is it true? And sometimes just creating space between the moment and the meaning, that's enough to start rewriting the script. That's how we begin to unhook from the critic. Not by silencing it completely, but by refusing to let it be the only voice in the room. Fifth, healing confidence means naming what hurts. We can't heal what we don't name. Naming a micro-trauma doesn't make you dramatic, it makes you honest. It creates space for clarity, for self-compassion, and eventually for boundaries. Now, I know this part can feel uncomfortable, especially for those of us who were raised with messages like, don't make a big deal out of nothing, or if it didn't leave a mark, it doesn't count. But emotional pain doesn't need to be loud to be real. And naming something as painful doesn't make you fragile. It means you're paying attention. When you name something that hurt, really name it, you give yourself permission to feel. And that is where healing begins. You're saying, that moment landed. I didn't imagine it. I'm not overreacting. It mattered. Because let's be honest, so much of our suffering comes not just from the moment itself, but from the gaslighting we do to ourselves afterward. We downplay, we minimize, we compare, we try to explain away our pain to stay strong, when in truth, strength comes from looking it square in the eye and saying, yes, that happened, and yes, it hurt. In my own work, I've seen over and over again, confidence isn't the product of ignoring wounds. It's the result of being able to tell the truth about them, quietly, kindly, without shame. And naming what hurts doesn't mean you're stuck in the past. It means you're learning from it instead of carrying it blindly into your future. Here's what happens when we don't name the pain. It doesn't go away. It finds another way out, sometimes through withdrawal, sometimes through anger, sometimes through a numbness we can't quite explain, and often through stories about ourselves that are simply not true. Stories that shrink us, that limit us, that keep us from showing up fully. But when you pause and say, okay, that moment where they dismissed me, that left a mark, or that tone made me question myself, you interrupt the cycle. You bring compassion to the part of you that felt unseen or unvalued. And compassion is what makes confidence sustainable. Not ego, not bravado, compassion. Naming the pain also allows us to draw boundaries, not walls, but boundaries, healthy ones. The kind that say, I'm willing to stay open, but I won't stay silent when I'm being diminished. That is a bold, brave move. And it's a move that builds the kind of confidence that doesn't need applause to feel real. Because in the end, confidence isn't about pretending everything is fine. It's about honoring what's real and choosing to move forward anyway, grounded in your own truth. So here's the truth I want to leave you with. Confidence isn't something you're born with. It's something you reclaim. You reclaim it by noticing the quiet moments that chipped away at you. You reclaim it by telling the truth about what hurt, not to dwell, but to understand. You reclaim it every time you choose to stay open instead of armoring up. Every time you talk back to your inner critic. Every time you say, that mattered, and I still get to matter too. We've been taught to chase big breakthroughs and loud declarations of worthiness. But real confidence, it grows in the small, sacred moments where you decide to show up for yourself, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. You don't need to be louder or tougher or more impressive. You just need to trust that your voice matters, that your story matters, that those small cracks from micro traumas, they're not signs of weakness. They're proof that you've lived, that you've felt deeply, and that you still have the courage to rise. Start there and keep going. Good luck. And remember, you're already enough.